Hello to everyone who has joined us so far. We are going to wait a few minutes to start the session. Hello to everyone who has joined so far. And just before we start, I'm going to send across the registration form for this event. And since we have almost everyone here right now, we are ready to start the event, right? So hello and good evening to everyone joining us today, and welcome to our Independent Food System Summit Dialogue on Just Transition in Livelihoods for Resilient Food Systems. Food systems around the globe are vulnerable to the impact of climate change, which are set to, I'm hearing something. Okay, yeah. Food systems around the globe are vulnerable to the impact of climate change, which are set to become more frequent and intense over the coming decades. Crop cultivation, livestock, fisheries, and aquaculture, as well as related sectors such as forestry, are heavily affected by the changes in weather patterns, extreme weather conditions, and slow onset processes such as sea level rising and loss of ecosystem services. Here we are at a crucial point in time to have this dialogue to generate a much needed discussion on just transition in livelihoods for resilient food systems. I wish all the very best for this discussion and would like to hand over to the curator for the day, Ms. Senasha Ekanayaka, the Program and Communication Manager at Slack and Trust.
Thanks very much, Rani, for setting the tone for this event. And welcome to everybody, and welcome to everyone who's joining us on Facebook as well. To those who are joining us the second time around, welcome. Our first independent dialogue on participation inclusive climate risk management for resilient and climate-friendly food systems was held about 2 weeks ago. In case you missed it or was a part of it and want to find something else, we have a recording that's uploaded to our YouTube channel. I will drop the link to that below. And just to also let everyone here know that the event will be recorded and it is currently live on Facebook as well. Just a few housekeeping rules to get started. We have a registration form for the day. The registration form already filled out. It would be really great if you could fill this out for around this time as well. Second of all, please do keep yourselves unmuted. You could turn your video on. Connection is good enough. It would be really great to see you. And we do have a question and answer session that will happen as almost you would have noticed. So please do drop your questions in the chat and we could take it forward to the speakers during that session. So with that said, I would like to move on to our first speaker for the day, Ms. Vasita Vijayanayaker. She's the Executive Director here at Slack and Trust. Vasita, over to you.
Hello, everyone. First of all, I'd like to excuse for any background noises that you might hear. There are sudden noises that come up. We are working from home at the moment. So welcome, everyone. And thank you, Sanashia, for the introduction, and also everyone for joining today's session. It's great to speak on this topic, because the work that we do on food systems as well as climate resilient actions, that the actions that we do to achieve climate resilience across localities as well as national level processes as well as international results, focus on livelihoods, just transition in different ways. So I wanted to just provide a few things that we focus on at Like and Trust that connect with this theme. So one is about livelihoods and communities. So looking at food systems and food security, how we can achieve this through focus on local communities and vulnerabilities. And this will be part of the just transition process as well, because if we are trying to achieve food security and also climate resilience, it's important that we focus on communities and do not leave them behind. And the next one is about capacity building and skill development. So in order to achieve the resilience that we aim for, it's important that we build capacities, understand the needs, the capacity needs of communities as well as countries, and then also make sure that it's an inclusive and participatory process. And this could be through youth engagement, creation of jobs, through technology and innovation for regenerative agricultural practices, and also local context-based solutions. So we need to understand the measures that we take to ensure food security is appropriate to the localities that we focus on, as well as the country's needs, as well as the environment and the context that we apply this in. And it's also important to focus on gender, but we also have experts here on this topic, so I'm not going to go too deep into it. And also social protection and risk management, how different risks that we feel due to disasters, climate, for example, from COVID implications that we are facing right now, how these can be addressed. So if I go a bit deeper into how this could happen or provide a few examples, one is about how we integrate the elements through SDG actions, for example, that the ones that I just focused on, SDGs and other processes that we focus on at country level and as well as internationally could be solutions for us to achieve just transition. So we can have projects and actions that focus on food security, which integrate elements of SDG indicators at local and national levels, especially at local level. So how can these planning processes at local level could integrate SDG sustainable development into different aspects related to agriculture, as well as livelihood enhancement and achieve food security. And then also focusing on nationally determined contributions and national adaptation plans when we are addressing climate risks and also building resilience. How can these be solutions to achieve just transition? So, for example, we are going through this review and updating process of NDCs at country level at the moment. There are, I think, about 80 countries or more that have submitted the NDCs. It's important to see how just transition is taken into account, especially in the food sector. So this could be through different processes. While we're looking at cutting down emissions and raising ambitions, how much are we focusing on the livelihoods? So sometimes the solutions that we introduce might not be the ones that protect the livelihoods. So there is a need that we look at the livelihoods being transitioned into a process that is, which is climate resilient without losing the livelihoods that exist. So that's important when we are looking at developing countries, especially because sometimes if we're introducing certain solutions, we might not have the enabling environment to implement them, even in other countries. So looking at the enabling environment and looking at how emission reduction could happen in a manner that's just in the agriculture and food systems. And then looking at supply chains, so looking at the overall food system, and then looking at how the supply chain production as well as consumption could connect with this. So in the work that we're doing, two examples I want to highlight. So one is about how we localize NDCs and the work that we're doing around it. So we're looking at how landscape management or the land use plans that are developed could be integrating food security, livelihoods, enhancing economic diversification in the food system, as well as integrating SDG indicators as well as risk management processes. So this is happening already. And I think if anyone wants, you can get more information later on this. And then also over the years, since about 2015, we've been focusing on sustainable food consumption and production, which has a component about moving towards food systems that are ethical as well as climate resilient. And this includes youth participation, capacity building, entrepreneurship, as well as meat reduction practices. So these all were taken into account with a component of just transition and how this would connect with climate action as well as sustainable development. And also cross-cutting aspects. So when we're doing work on any climate-related or sustainable development-related work and related food systems especially, we look at how livelihoods can be scaled up and enhanced through participatory processes in discussion with communities by identifying the needs, as well as the opportunities that lie or present to scale these up in a climate-friendly and sustainable manner. And this would take into account how local solutions could be developed, how the youth in the community could be empowered, and also gender and participation-based actions that we focus on, so that at every level there could be a transition which is resilient as well as not discriminatory, taking into account all the vulnerabilities as well as the capacities of different communities and the contexts that we work in. So these are a few things I want to highlight, but I'm very much looking forward to hearing on different aspects that I spoke of now through expertise and different examples that the other speakers are going to present. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Wasita. I would now like to move on to our second speaker of the day, Mr. Duncan Williamson. He is the founder of Nourishing Food Systems. And thank you very much for the questions already. We will make note of this and take it forward to our question and answer session, which will happen a bit later. Duncan, over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. So, apologise for my background today. The only room in my house I could take this call in has my children have taken over and decorated for me. So, but yeah, so I'm the founder and a director at Nourishing Food Systems, and we are a food systems advisory organisation. And I work primarily with Nourish Scotland, where we're working on just transition and convening dialogues around that just transition to come up with local-led solutions from farmers and local government that we are going to feed into COP26 in Glasgow. And I'm also working with Action Against Hunger, where I am developing their strategy for food systems and climate change and how that works for their mission in the least developed countries in the world. And so I'm going to focus a bit on climate change and its impacts on the food system, first of all, and then go into just transition and how important that is. But what we know is that climate change influences food nutrition security, it affects food availability, access, distribution. We are seeing hunger on the rise around the world. And what we're also noticing is there's almost a lack of awareness of the severity of the impacts of climate change on the food system and how it's impacting on people, how it's impacting on farmers, and how we are, even if we move to a net zero world as soon as possible, we're still locked into climate change impacts, and things are going to get more challenging without innovative solutions such as just transition. If we don't do work straight away, because what we know is that when we look at it, if you look at the state of agriculture, climate change is going to reduce the nutritional content of many crops. We also know it's going to result in reductions in yields in many crops all over the world, such as maize, rice, wheat, some cereal crops, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. And we also know that extreme weather is going to affect the stability of harvests and the reliability of harvests. So we know climate change is going to hit the food system in many ways. It's also going to impact on livestock as well. It's going to impact on the quality of livestock, reproduction, growth rates. Increased temperatures causes stress. Feed quality is going to go down. We know that there's going to be greater variety of pests, a rise of zoonotic diseases, such as one we're all going through at the moment. We also know that climate warming may lengthen forage growing seasons, but as I just mentioned, it's it will reduce the quality of the forage. And this is before we get into other impacts such as water resources. And then finally, climate change is also going to affect it through blue food. So fisheries and aquaculture are going to face similar challenges. Climate change does mean fisheries are going to move. It does mean that some species are not going to be able to adapt. We're going to see a probable reduction in the amount of fishery that's available to be caught. And aquaculture is going to suffer as well, as it may not have the resources to grow the fish and farm the fish. And increased temperatures are going to lead to ocean acidification, introduction of invasive species, diseases, parasites, pathogens. It's going to affect hatcheries. Sea level rise and storm intensification is going to pose additional risks. So what we're seeing is every part of the food system is going to be impacted by climate change in some way or another. And we need to start looking at solutions like just transition to make sure that we can build this resilience we're talking about. And the other underpinning threat to this is biodiversity. It's essential to our food system. And biodiversity is also the most damaged, is being most impacted by our food system as well. We know that the single biggest driver of biodiversity loss is the food system. And we have to start looking at how we can reverse that, because any resilient food system relies on biodiversity. And the thing is, there are lots of solutions around this being discussed by people, but there is no magic screwdriver that's going to fix everything. I think we have to be very much aware of this. So, I mean, for example, a lot of people in Europe are talking about cellular meat and plant-based proteins as almost this magic screwdriver. But the question I have for that is, how does this benefit farmers? The people producing cellular meat and plant-based proteins aren't farmers. It's built in a lab somewhere. And I'm not saying that there's not a great role for lab-grown meat and lab-grown food in the future, but it's not going to solve everything. It's not going to solve livelihoods. It's not going to solve a lot of the social impacts, even if it delivers some positive environmental contributions. So I think we need to be aware of that and look at how we can have conversation that goes to public goods, that brings farmers into the conversation, and make sure that farmers, livelihoods, communities are being met. And that's why I think just transition is so exciting. So for me, if we're looking at just transition, the first step on just transition pathways is inclusive policy dialogues, bringing in marginalized, poor and vulnerable groups into the decision-making forum at all levels is going to be absolutely key. And it's going to be key for civil society, for companies and for governments to listen to those groups, to make sure they listen and learn about what they need and create a framework where people are working together to address some of the challenges and to deliver the solutions we have there. I also think governments must reform agri-food policies, subsidies, and work towards the training that people need to deliver the food, to deliver a just transition, to making sure that wages are in place and smallholders are supported, and just to make sure that we deliver for the food insecure, not just for the food secure, as it sometimes happens. I think we need to relocalize food systems, making sure that food reaches those in need. We need to look at local and less intensive food systems. All of this together must build resilience, and that is what we're working for at both Nourish Scotland and Action Against Hunger. And as part of this, we recognise it includes building looking at ecosystem restoration, so looking at restoring mangroves, agroforestry, solutions that may not appear straight away to have food solutions in it, but we know if you restore a mangrove, you protect from inundation and sea level rise, and that provides security for livelihoods. So we need to look at this in a joined up way. And as Vasifa said, parallel to this is working on sustainable consumption. It's both in Europe and places, we need to look at what we're eating. We need to move away from high impact diets. We need to explore things like lifestyle leapfrogging, making sure the right foods are available for people without making the mistakes in parts of the world that we made in Europe, where we decided to fall in love with ultra processed food and fall in love with factory farm meat. So we need to make sure that the consumption choices deliver on the needs of farmers and of biodiversity and on nutrition, so bringing them together. And so just a very quick example, what we're doing at Nourish Scotland is we're having these farm-to-form dialogues, as I mentioned. We're having them around the world. And we're focusing on COP26, but they'll go beyond this. We're having dialogues in Sri Lanka, India, Sub-Saharan Africa, Europe, North America, Ecuador. And these are all about building trust and getting farmers together, bringing farmers into the room so they can explain to local authorities and citizen groups what they need to deliver the food, to provide this transition to a sustainable food system from local authorities, from people. And also so local authorities can start having these conversations and build on these conversations beyond this program. And these are very exciting. We are inclusive, all farmers. We say there's no one production system that is we are going to prioritise from this. We think all farmers need to be involved in this conversation because they are part of the solution. And we're going to take the results of these dialogues to COP. We're going to have a global dialogue at COP where we're going to hopefully have 100 different people involved, probably remotely, where we are going to present the results of these dialogues to the negotiators at COP to say, if you're going to look at solutions and delivering climate smart futures, you have to bring just transition into the framework and prioritise it. And then finally, at Action Against Hunger, we are also promoting just transition. And one of our challenges that we are trying to overcome is that the solutions being proposed at the moment are not holistic. Funders haven't really engaged on just transition enough. And there's a lack of community engagement from the funders, from a lot of NGOs in how they can deliver it. And we're trying to overcome that now because we think it's so important for international NGOs to work with communities to deliver this. So yeah, so in summary, just transition is really important. It includes ecosystem restoration. It includes livelihoods, which are going to be so important in delivering this. We have to make sure people's needs are met alongside with those of others. It's going to include looking at things like social safety net, disaster risk management. It's going to include making sure the financial systems are in place to deliver this at every level. And it's going to include working on some of the drivers of food system, of the current food system, such as diets, overconsumption of livestock and waste, to make just transition easier in the medium to long term. And I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Duncan, and thank you to those who are dropping in questions in the chat. It's good to have the discussion going from, well, the start itself, and it would be great if others could also join in with questions. For those who are joining us on Facebook, please feel free to drop any questions in the chat so we could take it forward to the plenary as well. Right. I would now like to introduce our next speaker for the day, Mr. Lassie Brown. He's the Global Director of 50 by 40. And Lassie, over to you.
Thank you so much, Sinead. Thank you so much for having me. And I think this is one of the most important conversations to be had around food systems right now. I'm going to try to be relatively brief and just mention some of the key points I think are important, particularly this year in relation to the Food System Summit and how it pertains to the other international frameworks we're engaging in, as Duncan was talking about the COP as well. Allow me just to start with a bit of historical perspective on why just transition is so important and why I personally believe it can be a game changer and will be a game changer for food systems. As all of you will know, the just transition perspective has always been a major thing, has been a major thing for the last 5 to 10 years within energy transition. So the transition from fossil fuel-based economy to renewable energy-based economy was in the late 80s, early 90s, mid 90s, to be honest, not picking up so quickly. One of the key game changers to speeding up that process was that when the threat of job elimination and therefore the negative effects on country GDPs was, I wouldn't say eliminated, but dealt with through talking about what a just transition would entail. So instead of going from a discourse that was speaking around the issues of how shifting away from coal and oil actually would leave a lot of people unemployed and would be a net job decrease for a country, then the discourse started becoming about how shifting to renewable energy actually can change jobs and create more jobs and do it for the better. So personally, working as a negotiator and an advocate, it really was a game changer for me as well, because the second you can sit down and talk to a minister of finance particularly and say, well, not only does shifting to more renewable energy create more jobs, it creates better jobs, it creates safer jobs, it creates better paid jobs, there's more gender equality, there's more demographical and geographical dispersion of the jobs. So it's a win-win across. So that was one of the main things that really changed the game. And you will all know the historical quote from Sharon Burrows, who is the lead of the ITUC, the International Trade Union Confederation, when she about, I guess it's 12 years ago now, was asked at a press conference, why would trade and workers unions care about climate change? She said, well, there are no jobs on a dead planet. And that resonated really, really well and really created like that quote, as you can see, I'm still moved by it because it just kind of makes so much sense. So that really started off this really landslide, and also helped in terms of the aspect of access to power holders and power makers, because the trade and the workers unions are also very powerful. And if they are kind of like singing our gospel, then it actually is very beneficial. So the aspect of just transition within food systems is probably about 10 years after that of the energy transition, which makes it a little bit late in the day, but also provides us with a really interesting and great opportunity to take the main learnings from the food system, from energy, and actually apply them to the food system. So that is what I think is very important. And that's what 50 by 40 has been doing for a number of years now. Essentially, we have been looking into what are the metrics, what are the perspectives, what are the key aspects of creating a just transition within food system. And we have chosen to focus on livestock issues for many different reasons. First of all, because livestock is the most currently the most destructive system within the agriculture. It's the system that takes the most land use, and it's the system that creates the biggest problems in terms of local pollution, in terms of inequitable distribution of food and so forth, which all of you know of, so I won't lecture you anything on that. So we think that is where the biggest change has to happen, and it has to happen as quickly as possible. So from that perspective, we started looking into what would it actually look to focus on a just transition within livestock. So we kind of coined the term just livestock transition and started working strongly on that and finding out the best ways to deal with that. We have for a number of years now trying to find ways of really doing all the research that would allow us to have the cold facts, the cold numbers on the table when talking to negotiators and country representatives, for instance. There still are very few studies, unfortunately, that really speaks to the fact of why it's such a great idea to shift towards more plant-based food systems. But one of them is that there was a study that came out last year by the International Labour Organization, and I think Mustafa Kamal is here today, Bank, that demonstrated that if a shift was made to more plant-based food systems in Latin America and the Caribbean, we would be looking at up to a net 15 million job creation by 2030 to coincide with the SDGs. So that is very promising, and that study really resonated across the board, both within civil society but also within governments. So that is what our focus has been. Why is it really important this year? Well, it's incredibly important because the Food Systems Summit is taking place this year. And as you know, the Food Systems Summit has a mandate to come up with recommendations for other other multilateral spaces, such as the UNFCCC, such as the CBD influence policies and the FAO, and of course come back to the CFS and create specific programs how to take solutions forward. And as you all know, livestock is a very contentious issue, and it's also contentious within the Food Systems Summit. So I've been fortunate enough to be the Global Civil Society lead for Action Track 2, and also now I'm the action area co-lead of the action area that deals with managing sustainable and managing existing food systems, which covers agroecology, indigenous food systems, and livestock, and so forth. And in there, we have been strongly pushing the aspect of just livestock transition, simply because we think it is the single most important issue. The aspiration is there that when we get into, when we come out of the Food Systems Summit in September, and have like key recommendations that is taken particularly to the COP in Glasgow at the end of the year, there has to be a very strong discourse around the need to shift to more plant-based food systems and to start addressing the just transition in livestock production. That is particularly important as these recommendations will play a strong role in guiding the NDC revisions we're going to be seeing this year. It's difficult to predict how much can actually be changed this year, but starting next year, and particularly leading up to 2025, which is the next stock take year for the Paris Agreement, in part of the ratchet up mechanism, it is so important to have the things in place. So what comes out of the Food Systems Summit might not yield specific results within the countries from day one, but it strongly guides what happens at the other multilateral spaces. So that's why it's so important for us. A couple of things around that I want to mention is that we've been pushing very strongly to ensure that any solutions that come out of the Food Systems Summit is strongly coordinated with any other multilateral processes, whether it's G7, G20, G77, and particularly how it's related to the CFS, because if we start yet another umbrella piece of work that is not aligned with the other UN institutions or affiliated groupings such as G20, we're going to have a problem. And we're seeing that now that within the UN Food Systems Summit, there is about 40 countries have really engaged in the Food Systems Summit, comparing that to the UNFCCC, where you have 197 countries. So there's a big discrepancy. There's a novelty to Food Systems Summit, and a lot of countries simply haven't had the time and resources compared to the COP. It's been going on for so many years, but nonetheless, there's a discrepancy there that's so important to deal with. And I think it's our responsibility to help identify champion countries within the UN Food Systems Summit who specifically can be champions of the just transition, and from our perspectives, particularly champions of a just wool transition, so they can be the one alongside multi-stakeholder groups that include civil society, can go to the COP and say, well, we have learned now, creating the biggest framework ever on food systems change, we have learned that just transition is crucial and just rural transition is particularly crucial. So this is what we need to do. So this is one of the things we are really pushing forward. And the other thing I wanted to mention in relation to just transition, it has to be very strongly anchored in fiscal policies and international financial flows. So right now there are several groupings that is part of the UN Food Systems Summit, but also related to other spaces that are specifically dealing around the fiscal aspect of food systems, and looking to see when we make this big transition that we have to make to stay within planetary boundaries and meet nutritional needs and so forth. How do we ensure that it is done in a way that financially and fiscally can like be carried forward in a good way? So how do we make those transitions really work? And there's so much to deal with, and particularly when you talk about food that is so complex compared to any other system, including energy transition, and particularly when it comes to livestock, simply because it is such a complex system, you know, when you take into consideration the commodity trade, the feed that is transported across the world, whether it's palm kernel expeller from Indonesia, whether it is soy and corn from the Americas to Europe, for instance, to produce meat and so forth. So there are so many aspects to take into consideration, and having the figures right is so important, because when we get to the COP and in the coming years, when we have to make sure all this is anchored in the Paris Agreement, so we can ensure that it is placed part of the biggest threat we're facing, climate change, we have to make sure that 4 ministers always remain equally happy. That's the Minister of Agriculture, the Minister of Climate Change, the Minister of Health, and the Minister of Finance. And the Minister of Finance is really important because unless the figures are good, we're going to meet a stopgap there. So it's so important to ensure that we always put forward the good numbers of why shifting to a better food system actually creates better jobs and thus boosts the GDP. I'll mention one last thing here before I stop, which is the importance of having a really serious conversation around stranded assets. And I know some organizations and some countries, particularly Netherlands, have been dealing with that. What do I mean by that? Well, when you want to shift the food system, you want to shift away from a place where from livestock, intensified livestock production in our case here. That is not a very simple measure to make, simply because the farmers have invested millions of dollars in production systems, are probably heavily indebted, are forced to deliver a certain amount of animals each month to be able to make ends meet. So transitioning out of that is complicated, and it's going to take huge aspects of compensation plans and investments from governments, particularly, who should be taking the lead on just transition. So it's very important that conversation about stranded assets and how to overcome that is held, and how to make those calculations that demonstrate that an investment in making that shift, although it might be a big investment, is much less than the cleanup costs of not doing it. The cleanup costs we're going to have 5 to 10 years down the line, and particularly looking at 2030. I'll leave it there. Thank you so much, and look forward to this conversation.
Thanks very much, Lasse, and sorry to cut you short there, but we just also want to leave some time for discussion. We do have some questions on the chat, and not all questions would be, I'm not sure if you have time for all questions. So the speakers, if you're able to, please do try to answer within the chat. But I think while we get in more questions, I would like to quickly go into a very small Mentimeter that we have done for today. My colleague Ruani will put the link to the Menti on the chat as well. So just to maybe get started, so to those of you all who haven't accessed the Mentimeter before, please go into www.menti.com and use the code 123348. The code is also in the chat. So just to get started, we would like to pick your brain on what your expectations are from this particular independent dialogue. We still do have another session and some group work to go, but for the moment, do you have any expectations at all? And if so, what might they be? We'll leave this open for about another minute. And those who are joining us from Facebook, it's possible for you to take this Menti as well. Could log into menti.com and use the code 123348. And thanks for the questions that are coming on the chat. Very helpful. So I'm just going to read a few responses. Better understanding of just transition and how to implement it, learn about innovative ideas on just transition food systems, share experiences of good practices, solutions in just transition that can be applied in the developing country context, better understand what individuals can do, I'm assuming in the context of just transition food systems, examples, get knowledge on the topic. And we also do have wide variety range of speakers from across the world, so it's good to have different perspectives coming in. What are the solutions and challenges in just transition food systems? What is the role of women and youth in just transition? Okay, so this is great, and thank you to those who are submitting your responses. So we are going to go into a very quick quiz. It's just 3 questions with no prize at the end. So thank you to those who participated earlier. So this is a little fun quiz. And there should be a little, if you click on the next screen on your Menti, there should be a little box to pop in your name or any name of choice for this quiz. Right. So we do have, believe, 7 participants. Oh, okay. We have now 10. So we're just going to get started very quickly. So, and those who answer fast also get more points. So the Food System Summit is organized around a number of action tracks and cross-cutting levels of change. How many are there? So there are 4 answers. You need to pick one. And we have about 10 seconds left. Okay, 3 seconds to go. Right. Okay. Oh, only 3 people got the right answer. Okay. So let's see how we're doing on our leaderboard very quickly. So we have Ambriel, Montana, and Pingu. Okay. Right, let's move on to the next question. And those who are joining us from Facebook or just joining in on Zoom, you could log into menti.com and use code 123348. Which action track is this particular independent dialogue focused on? So I hope you could see, I tried to increase the font. So there's action track 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. You have about 10 seconds left. And we have 17 people playing. Very cool. Okay, let's see. Right, the correct answer was action track 4. And we have Ranjoy, Montana, and Pingu. All right, let's maybe go on to the next last question. Question 3 of 3. What is not one of the 7 principles of engagement guiding the Food System Summit? So active urgency, ensure equity for all, recognize complexity, and embrace multi-stakeholder inclusivity. Three seconds to go. Right. And oh, oops, no one got the correct answer. This is directed from the UNF, the UN Food Summit System Summit website. And okay, and Ranjoy is the winner. Congratulations for winning, and thank you to those who took part. We would very quickly go on to questions. We do have about we have I would say like 5 to 10 minutes more for questions. So I went through some of the questions, and I would like to ask all of the speakers to maybe comment on this very briefly as possible. So with COVID-19, there has been additional pressure put not just on food systems, but also the access to food, especially in developing countries. So when this comes on top of the existing impacts such as climate change and increase in disasters, would this kind of shift the focus on how it would be addressed and what kind of changes? I would maybe like to ask all speakers to comment on this very briefly, if possible. Leslie, would you like to start since you were the last speaker?
Sure, I can do that. Well, very briefly, I think I spoke a little too long before. I'll just say that you know, the aspects of the pandemics and zoonosis diseases and how it relates to food systems is of course a huge game changer. We have to change the food system to prevent further zoonotic diseases and for further pandemics. It's a no-brainer from an ethical, from a health perspective, and from a financial perspective as well. So, and I think that has not been addressed enough within the Food System Summit. Of course, it is addressed and there's working groups on it, but it should be a much stronger overarching theme because it's one of the biggest threats to the food systems, and it pertains strongly to resilience as well. And in the end, we have seen how the ones who pay the biggest price, particularly within the livestock system, so the frontline workers working on in slaughterhouses or in processing plants, they're the ones who are suffering the most because of exposure and because of bad working conditions. So from a humanitarian perspective, it's very important as well.
Thanks very much. Maybe Duncan?
Yes, thank you. I mean, very quickly, I'd echo what's just been said, but I think there's a couple of things that are very important here. I think we need to then, learning from the pandemic is we need to look at trade and food systems, because over the course of the pandemic, we've probably relearned the value of local systems and local markets and shorter supply chains. So we need to do everything we can to facilitate the growth of those and to strengthen their resilience. And I'm slightly concerned that there is a narrative coming out from people involved in global trade, government departments, commodity brokers, who are saying that global trade worked over the food system, because during the food system, the big commodities like your maize, your soy, your palm, they weren't affected at all by the COVID. And in fact, there was some record harvests. And so that part of the global system held up, and they're saying that's an excuse for business as usual, when I think we need to actually be stronger in vocalizing the fact we need to relocalize the food system. So I think that is really one important part of it, so we don't continue down this road. I think another big part of it is going to be looking at how we can develop agricultural diversity, because I think that is going to be fundamental to a resilient food system. So promoting diverse crops, promoting multi-crop farming, so that you're using the right crops in the right place. That means that the local market, the local community will have a resilient form of food, and they will make sure there's enough food being grown. So even if there is another problem, whether it's a weather condition or a pandemic, there will be some food available. And I think the final part to it is a lot more needs to be done around women's rights, gender empowerment, gender equality, because we know that when you have pandemics or climate change, the first people to suffer tend to be the women, and they're the people growing the food. They often are the unrecognized landowners. So we have to do an awful lot more to have women involved in the conversation, and to make sure that they are recognized as the key to getting out of these future crises, and to listen to them and to respect them a lot more.
Thanks very much, Duncan. And Wasita, also, I would maybe kindly like to request speakers, if you're able to try and respond to some of the questions on chat as well. Wasita, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I think Lasya and Duncan highlighted a few things I wanted to, but I just wanted to highlight how social levels, or the access to food and economic empowerment is needed also to address pandemics, because there is one problem. You might have a lot of production, as Duncan highlighted, but then whether people can access during a pandemic or a crisis situation, that would be something we need to look into. But I've also seen positive changes where there were lockdowns, so communities have started growing their own food. So looking at how supply chains could be at local level, as opposed to looking at getting at national level from one point to the other. And also having, again, looking at the supply chains of ensuring that access to food is there so that we can be secure, and also how people can be empowered to access the food through economic empowerment. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Wasita. And I would also maybe like to request those who are joining us to please fill in the registration form, so that we are able to submit this, with the details of those who are attending, and also to just get an understanding of who is in the room with us as well. So moving on to our second session on including gender, youth, and social protection for resilient and equitable food systems, I would now like to request Ms. Catherine Esmal. She's a gender consultant at the Resilience Global Partnership, to make her statement.
Thank you very much. So first of all, as mentioned, I'm a consultant to the Ensure Resilience Global Partnership, and I work for a consultancy called Anthropogender, and we provide advocacy and advisory services to clients to basically support them advance gender equality, women's empowerment and sustainable development. So just firstly, to identify solutions to achieve a just transition in livelihoods and to ensure that the benefits of this transition are shared, it's really important to first of all recognise the context in which this is happening. And so I want to just spend a few minutes now talking about that. Can you see me on the screen? Is that all working okay?
Yes.
Okay, super, very good. So just first of all, in terms of the context, so women and men are differentially impacted by both climate change and disaster. So I think that's a really important starting point that we have to consider. Women's adaptive capacity is well recognised to be both lower. For instance, they have lower levels of access to technology. That might be, say, a mobile phone in some instances. They also have lower incomes to invest in resilience building mechanisms as well. And we also see that women's economic activity is concentrated mainly in many countries in the agricultural sector, which can be hardest hit by, or will be hardest hit and already is being hardest hit by climate change. And just in terms of a statistic there, in terms of the labour force in the least developing countries, women make up over half of the agricultural labour force and 60% of all those working in agriculture in Southern Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. In terms of resource ownership as well, we've touched on that, the earlier speakers have mentioned, and really women generally have, in part due to legal constraints as well, lower levels of resource and asset ownership, which also means that they will be differentially impacted. And overall at a global level, we see that fewer women are also covered by social protection schemes, in part due to some of the informality of their employment. So moving on to the context in terms of food systems, women and men, and of course there are differences between different groups of women and men, and recognising sort of this concept of intersectionality as well, but they have different livelihoods within food systems, so in crop cultivation and livestock, aquaculture and fisheries. So there are multiple different factors which are driving this, and some of that relates also to the policy and legal context, what they're allowed to do, but a lot of it is driven by social norms, and these can really influence whether whether women economically participate at all in certain parts of these value chains, the kind of roles that they take, whether the roles that they are taking on within a particular sector are done so formally or informally, and what's sort of seen as appropriate or inappropriate work for a woman. And it also relates to the wider context, which will sort of drive some of these decisions, which is related to sort of the care responsibilities they have within the household, and how that is then balanced with the roles they take in terms of their wider livelihoods as well. So just that's a bit of context first of all. Also in terms of policy context at the international level, there's really a great recognition now that these increased climate risks are really requiring new adaptation and resilience building mechanisms, which are really sensitive to these differences between women and men, and this is also very much applicable to food systems as well, so not just generally. And so many of you will be aware, but both the IPCC and also the UNFCCC with its gender action plan also recognise that women and men can face these differential climate change vulnerabilities and impacts, and this has really profound implications for their livelihoods and their well-being. And so, at a policy level, we're getting these international calls for integrating both gender sensitive and gender responsive approaches to sort of adaptive mechanisms and responses. And that there is this recognition that we really need to build a gender lens, whatever that means, into achieving resilient and equitable food systems, and with other sectors as well, this is equally relevant. So in terms of solutions itself, one element that I want to just really focus on here is around the importance of climate and disaster risk financing. So financial mechanisms as a solution really being promoted now internationally to support this process of just transition within the food system, but also more broadly. And the Ensure Resilience Global Partnership, who I support with their work, have a declaration on gender, and that very specifically highlights the importance of integrating gender considerations into these financing solutions. And it acknowledges these gender differences in these vulnerabilities and impacts, and how that really both its members, but generally the wider community in designing financial mechanisms need to account for these gender differences in the way that and risks in the way that they're designed and implemented. So in terms of that, what does that actually mean in practice, and why is it relevant also to sort of food systems? So these risk transfer financing solutions, so that could be like microinsurance, or it could also be more of a social protection type national scheme, which is often referred to as macro level climate risk insurance, for instance. These different solutions need to account for the different risk profiles of different groups of people, and so different groups of women and men in food systems, and the barriers that they may have in terms of accessing and also benefiting from these different financing solutions. And something that is really important here to consider is that we know that they do play different roles also within these financial models in insurance. So you may get fewer women working in insurance, for instance, and the way to purchase insurance solutions, different types of agricultural insurance solutions. The distribution models may work, some models may work better for women versus men, for instance. And so a key consideration when we consider this type of mechanism for food systems is the choice of crops, for instance, that may be covered through these insurance mechanisms. And we know that in some contexts, there are certain crops that are sort of wholly farmed by women versus those that are seen as sort of male crops, for instance, as well. So that's just in terms of the solutions, the financial solutions themselves, and looking at these new mechanisms that are emerging really as a resilience building solution. But there's also, I think Vasita mentioned it earlier, policies themselves that integrate these financial mechanisms also are part of the solution as well. So there are various policies and strategies, whether it's a national climate change adaptation strategy, or in some countries it might be referred to as a green growth strategy, for instance, or it could be around agricultural strategies. These may draw on CDRFI, so climate and disaster risk financing insurance instruments, and these instruments in these policies need to explicitly both reference and account for these gender differences in both in terms of the context within the food system, and in terms of individuals being able to access and use these different and benefit from these different financial instruments. And so they need to account for instance, women's lower level of financial inclusion. So, meaning that they may be having less a level of access to some of these insurance mechanisms, for instance, at the micro level. But also the policy content itself needs to sort of move beyond to just sort of addressing some of these issues which make these financial mechanisms sort of gender sensitive, but they also need to move towards sort of transformation as well, and ensuring that these strategies actively through these financial mechanisms promote gender equality and incorporate these climate disaster risk financing activities that are addressing gender specific risks, say after a disaster as well, for instance, and sort of household dynamics as well, the fact that there are these gender discriminatory laws that exist. So these policies need to account for that. In terms of just challenges, very briefly, really there are challenges remaining in terms of implementing these different insurance mechanisms or sort of social protection mechanisms which use risk transfer mechanisms at a national level or a regional level. And some of the challenges in this, which is really preventing us build both resilient food systems and just resilience in general amongst all people and those that are most vulnerable to climate change, is the fact that there can be this lack of institutional coordination and collaboration of policymakers from diverse areas. We've heard one of the previous speakers mention the different government departments that are really useful to sort of ensure are integrated into these discussions. And yeah, the ministries of women where they exist wasn't mentioned. So they have some of this expertise that needs to be drawn in on and built on to inform these financial mechanisms as a solution to address the challenges of this just transition and within the food systems. Other challenges really is around data. Quite often, if you're taking a value chain approach to a food system, you want to know what roles women and men play in different parts of the value chain. And if you're looking at it from a financial perspective, you want to also look at it in terms of financial access, men versus women to insurance, for instance, but often sex disaggregated data is not there. And really that is a key challenge to being able to integrate this gender perspective and ensure that these solutions are both gender sensitive and gender responsive. There's also a need to build sort of capacity and understanding around the gender dimensions of these different instruments as well. And I think it was mentioned before, engaging with women's groups to address this. And then finally, my last point really is in terms of thinking about the content in policies. So ensuring that if you're talking about financial instruments for achieving this just transition in food systems, you also think about the gender dimensions of those financial instruments and access and usage related to that. So if you want to find out more information about some of the points that I've talked about today, do look at the Insure Resilience website. There's more information on their Centre of Excellence that they have, and there is a number of publications which do talk about this and do so from including amongst other sectors, an agricultural perspective. I'll leave it there, but hopefully I've covered some of the questions you had. So thank you.
Thanks very much. Those who have been with questions, I would encourage any speaker, if you're able to maybe kindly answer the questions in the chat itself. And also just a quick reminder on the registration form, if you haven't filled it out already. I would like to welcome our next speaker, Mr. Kairos de la Cruz. He is the Executive Director and Head of Climate Finance Team at the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Cities. Kairos.
Hi.
Hi,
good evening. Hi. Good evening, everyone. Good evening from Manila, Philippines. I don't know if there's a hard rule of not using any presentation, but I would want to use a short presentation just so to guide my 5 minutes better. Again, good evening, everyone. I'm Angelo Kairos Torres de la Cruz. I work for the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Cities. We're a small think tank which work in various levels of engagement from international to local arenas. And I'm happy to be here, and I'm really proud to share the floor with a lot of our distinguished speakers. I would like to start off with saying that food systems, just like every other pieces of work that everyone is working on, at least everyone who's in this call, has to deal with the reality that risks and challenges and vulnerabilities do not wait in line. They tend to compound each other. But for my presentation per se, I would like to focus on slow onset events, which are the creeping changes that are often ignored in terms of policy, research, and priorities, but are generally irreparable and irreversible if we don't pay them mind right now. And the other side of things, at least for which I think is very relevant to the Philippines and to everyone as well who are in this call, is extreme episodic events such as typhoons and earthquakes. This is a figure, I think, for the Philippines alone. It's an average losses from both public and private assets due to typhoons and earthquakes for the Philippines. And same goes for the rest of the region, at least in Southeast Asia, wherein everything is pretty much in danger because of both slow onset and episodic events. For the Philippines, again, slow onset events have been dealing a heavy blow in terms of our food systems, particularly on the production side of things, because we pretty much don't have enough safety nets in place to make sure that drought-affected areas can be covered, to make sure that other forms of economic and livelihood activities are made available to those who are affected, and so on. Same goes for aquaculture, and this is quite becoming a big thing now here in the Philippines, because it's becoming more apparent that because of slow onset events, particularly rising sea temperatures, there's been a shift of available fish stock from Philippine seas, and you know, the fisher folks cannot simply go beyond the usual traditional fishing grounds because of lack of technology and because of lack of capacity for storage and stuff like that. So pretty much the same things that have been mentioned by most of the speakers before me. We're in a dire situation, and we cannot afford to simply compartmentalize and choose where we fight, because these things happen at the same time, and taking them on as separate silos would be futile of an attempt. For the Philippines, there are several government strategies which some of you might be interested to look at as well. We have a lot of existing policy frameworks on climate and disaster risk response. And now we also have a Philippine Sustainable Finance Roadmap, which hopefully would include climate and disaster risk finance and insurance as part of its strategy. The government is continuing working with development partners and private sector to strengthen the implementation of CDRFI across all levels. This is far from the ideal, from the ideal scale that everyone would want it to happen. But there are small movements that hopefully would help build on a bigger push on this side of the work. Empower poor and vulnerable households and owners of micro, small, and medium enterprises to quickly restore their livelihoods after a disaster. I mean, one of the saddest realities that we have, which I think is also the same to some of you in this meeting, is that MSMEs, despite representing a huge number of economic actors, would usually have little, if nothing, if none at all, in terms of having insurance coverage or having safety nets made available to them. And some of the possible solutions that we are working on, or we are suggesting that you might also want to look at, is that the first one is there should be a layering of both indigenous adaptation practices and scientific evidence, which we think are both fundamental in manifesting better climate resilience and development. In the Philippines, per se, I mean, there are a lot of risk transfer mechanism practices that even the farmers and the cooperatives have not called as risk transfer mechanisms before. But they are old practices that, when you look at in totality, are actually really good examples of how people are buffering themselves against climate impacts and other disasters. As I've mentioned before, there should be robust support for macro, micro, and meso insurance, and at some extent, a reduction of premium costs for micro and meso insurance by sort of curating the flow of international climate finance. For most developing countries. I mean, for the Philippines, I mean, just to share, I mean, our biggest chunks of adaptation tag finance are actually used for insurance. But when we look at them, it's very hard to make, and it's very hard to see how these huge pots of money are actually benefiting the most vulnerable people, such as farmers, MSMEs, women, indigenous peoples, and so on. It should also be a particular interest that death among climate vulnerable countries have been approaching dangerous levels pre-COVID-19, and now even more with COVID-19 around. And grant-based instruments are central in addressing this looming concern of financing. And this is, I think, very important, particularly in the latest INSU Resilience High-Level Consultative Group meeting, wherein premium support was placed at the front and center of all the discussions. This is also being tackled by the Climate Vulnerable Forum and the V20 group of ministers in terms of pushing forward their priority economic issues in the COP and in other platforms as well. And I think this is one of the most important things that we realized in the past 2 years is that we should continue this conversation to happen. We should support any conversation that strives to tackle issues more holistically. And one of the things that we've been working on is called the multi-actor partnerships, wherein various organizations simply come in and talk about, for example, how to enhance information campaigns on financial and climate risk literacy on the ground. And on the other side of things, in the more high-level stuff, how do we elevate local voices and concerns to arenas where policy making, where in policy making and decision making actually happens. And I think we're going to see more of this with the MAP engagement, for example, with the INSU Resilience Global Partnership and with CBF and V20. And we'll be more than happy to open this conversation to a lot of people who are here in this call. And lastly, I think the pandemic highlights the significance of having demand-informed solutions. And as mentioned by one of our lead consultants and lead advisor, is that these risks happen at the same time. Risk layering should be incorporated, and these measures should be approached in such a way where in combination and complementarity are at the center instead of taking this on separately. Yeah, thank you. If you have further questions, that's my email address and our office website and Facebook page. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions later. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kairos, and thank you to the questions. We will have a group work section after all, where most of the speakers here would be in groups with you, so you could take forward the conversation there as well. I would now like to introduce our final speaker for the day, Ms. Thilini Gunathilake. She's my colleague as well as our research and program officer at the Global Youth Forum on Climate Change here at SLIC and Trust. Thilini, over to you.
Tanasha, thank you. I hope you could hear me.
Yes. Can see your screen.
Okay, thank you. So hello everyone, I'm Thilini Gunathilake, Research and Program Officer of SLIC and Trust. So I will be leading the Sustainable Food System project proposal under the Global Youth Forum on Climate Change. So here onwards, I will give you an insight about how youth can engage for resilient food systems. In terms of food systems and livelihoods, food systems are associated with wide range of human activities, and also it acts as a major source of income. So concerns regarding the food system related social injustice, inequity and inequality have emphasized the food system, the need for food system sustainability. So which has been identified as a vital human development issue. So to address this human development issue, actually the significance of human engagement and interest is it's highlighted, and it is not only for the food security, but also for the sustainable livelihoods and healthy lives of the youth. So as SLIC and Trust, we are closely working with youth in terms of different topics and including the sustainable food systems. And for an example, we have conducted multiple workshops in rural areas with the youth who are based on the farmer families. So these workshops were targeted on skills development, capacity building, and the aims of engaging with eco-friendly livelihoods. So further, it aims to ensure youth employment in the food sectors, leads to innovative ways for engagement as well as lead to food security. Following that, Like and Trust took a step forward for achieving these objectives in global level. As you are aware, the Strike and Trust hosted its 5th consecutive Global Youth Forum on Climate Change in December 2020, with a successful participation over 70 countries. Uh, the aim of the Global Youth Forum was to develop the skills and the capacity building of the youth in all over the world regarding different themes. The forum was structured under 4 themes, including biodiversity, coastal and marine ecosystems, climate change and disaster risk, as well as sustainable food systems, which received much attention uh, along the Global Youth Forum. So in the initial stage, we received numerous project proposals under each theme, and after the initial selection, the project proposals were publicly available for the voting. And during the Global Youth Forum, the participants could participate for a number of sessions and consultations and discussions from experts all over the world, which created a great experience for them, and they have learned a lot of things about the themes that they have interested. So at the end of the Global Youth Forum, they could consolidate their suggestions and their project proposal into a single project proposal under the supervision of experts and the feedbacks from their group participants. So when it comes to the sustainable food system theme, the key issue that the group members were discussed was the issue of food waste. So in there, they have discussed, they have indicated the fact that around 1/3 of the world's food produced for human consumption are lost or wasted every year, and it is around 1.3 billion tons per year. And also they have highlighted that 1 in 9 people are remaining unnourished globally. The fact that came up from the youth is also urban contexts are the biggest source of post-consumption food waste. So based on these facts, the youth could came up with a innovative and creative solution for the issue of food waste. So the initial objective of the project proposal is to reduce food waste in the urban areas and promoting urban permaculture. In here, we have identified how we can address sustainable development goals through this project proposal. So according to that, sustainable development goals of 12, 11, 13 and 17, which are responsible consumption and production, sustainable cities and communities, climate action, and partnerships for the goals were identified as the key sustainable development goals, which we address to this project proposal. Under that, the sustainable development target 12.3, which is by 2030 halve per capita global food waste at the retail and consumer levels and reduce food losses along production and supply chains, including post-harvest losses. It is the key target of the project proposal that we have developed in the Global Youth Forum. So here I have indicated a basic illustration about the project proposal that uh, developed by the youth in the Global Youth Forum. So initial idea is collecting the food waste in restaurants and hotels and send them to compost and organic fertilizer manufacturers, and these compost can be used for the urban permaculture promotion. And after the produce of the urban permaculture can be again sent to the hotels, restaurants, and supermarkets. So the whole process is integrated through technology like online platforms and mobile applications. So this is the basic idea that developed by the youth in the youth forum. So the project was structured under 4 phases. First phase is research phase. Here, the main focus is desk level research and stakeholder consultations involving youth and other actors on local food systems. And the second phase is mainly targeted on developing an online platform based on the researchers and stakeholder opinions, which were received in the first phase. So the third phase is engaging with stakeholders and building partnerships like restaurants, supermarkets, local farmers, distribution channels, and regulatory bodies. The fourth phase is mainly targeting on introducing the concept to a greater crowd through marketing and awareness. So this is the project proposals developed during the Global Youth Forum on Climate Change. And when it comes to the current stage of the proposal, so we are now in the stage of publishing the draft proposal. So currently we are looking for comments, suggestions, and ideas from mentors, experts who would be interested in engaging, and organizations who would like to contribute or engage. So currently we are at the stage of delivering this project draft proposal for a larger audience, and after that we are looking forward to implement this project. Maybe we are planning it to implement in that broken down to the different levels of implementation by individual activities, or some may choose to implement it as an overall project. The implementation stage will be conducted in different levels. So in here, I would like to highlight in addition to the action track 4 that we are discussing today, because the project proposal is mainly focuses on food waste, it also relate to the action track number 2 of shift to sustainable consumption patterns. So before ending my presentation, I would like to highlight that the significance of youth engagement for resilient food systems, because what we have experienced in the Global Youth Forum is the youth are very knowledgeable, and they are very innovative, and they are well aware about the global issues, and they always try to come up with suggestions and innovative solutions for global issues. So it is very important to engage with youth for finding solutions for the global issues. And last, I would like to invite all of you to, if you would like to contribute for our project proposal, if you would like to comment or give suggestions about our project proposal, please do write to us. In this stage, we are really appreciating your contribution to this project proposal. So thank you so much for giving this opportunity.
Thanks very much, Shalini, for the presentation. And I know that we are running a little behind schedule, so I would maybe like to encourage all speakers where possible to try and respond to the questions on the chat. And now actually we will be breaking into groups because I don't think we have time for separate Q&As. I'm very sorry about that. However, within the group, there will be, within the groups that you all will be divided into. some of the speakers will be there, and you might be able to have the discussion in a closer setting. So I will open the rooms now. For those joining us on Facebook, I'm afraid you might not be able to join in for this session. But if you are interested, you could drop us a note on the comments and we could send you the link to Zoom. So we'll be opening the rooms now. Just give it about a minute or two and then you'll be in a room. And we do have a Miro board that we have set up for each of the groups. So a Miro board is a virtual whiteboard of sorts, and we have our team members within each of these groups who will explain how this works. And each of the groups will also have a moderator, a facilitator as well. So you should see a box that pops up on your screen on your either your phone or your laptop, and please do select join group and you will be redirected there. So give us about a minute or two and we will send you to your groups. And yes, Abhishek, the recording will be available on our YouTube channel, hopefully within the next week or so. All right. So the groups will be open for about 20 to 25 minutes, and then we'll come here for a quick report back and close the session. Thank you. I'll see you soon. I think everyone is back in. Yes, I think everyone's back here. I hope your discussions were fruitful. And in the interest of time, for the report back session, I would like to maybe request all groups to have their Miro boards on displayed, and also for whoever is the facilitator or if the appointed person is presenting, to maybe highlight one important aspect from each of the three questions that were discussed. Just one in the interest of time, so that we also might have room for any remarks. So we could maybe start off with group one, the one where Lasse was facilitating. Lasse, would it be you?
Yes, I'll just do very brief, but we'll do a group effort here, I think. So as you can see from the Miro board, people were very productive in putting in really great suggestions. And you asked me to be brief, I will be brief. So there was just two things I want to highlight. One is gender, and the other one is youth. One was from a governance perspective, it's so important to include the importance of genders. And the studies have shown that participation of women in processes, whatever it might be, but particularly food systems, is very beneficial. So, and Duncan touched about that in his talk as well. So key aspects there. The other thing is about youth, the importance of actually working with youth, and particularly within just transition, to address the intergenerational responsibility to ensure that there is the next generation of farmers is already at an early stage aware of the benefits and the value add. And Thilini talked about a very intriguing project she's part of, which addresses the importance of showing value add of working in agriculture for young people who otherwise are, like most parts of the world, enticed by urbanization, urban lifestyle, but actually demonstrating to them how cool it is to kind of like go back to the fields and take ownership of food production and be productive pioneers for future food production, and how that relates to resilience and importing less and having more reliance on local food production. I think those were some of the key points. Thank you. And the rest of the group, please come in if I missed an important point.
Thanks very much, Safi, for sticking to time. I would now like to move on to the second group where Duncan was facilitating. With you presenting.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you. Hope you can see my mirror board. So I'll keep it brief, like Lasse. So I think two. Great discussion, really interesting perspective. So actually, three things came up that I've really taken away with me. One is that we need to get infrastructure right. So there's a lot of people who don't have the infrastructure or the transport systems to get the food to market, to have access to the food. So we need to explore the role of infrastructure in delivering a just transition. Another is the power imbalance within the food system. It's all in the hands of the big, large corporations, the big, large agribusinesses, the richer governments, even some of the bigger NGOs. And so how can we get include more stakeholders in policy making and decision making processes? That's going to be key. And then the final one that came up as well was people are starting to get, particularly young people, understand the role of sustainable food. And they want to eat sustainable food, but they don't have access to sustainable food. It's not affordable. So how can we work to make sure it is affordable? And I think that links to power balances as well. And it's really interesting that though awareness is there, access isn't. So yeah, I think that's great. So yeah, those are the things I'll cover. If I missed anything, please say.
Thanks very much, Duncan, for keeping it brief. And finally, Dennis. And also just a quick reminder, if there's anyone who hasn't filled out the registration form, the link is in the chat. It would be really helpful if you could do that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I think we also had a very good discussion. As you can see on the Miro board, we have a lot of points. Some of them have already been covered by the other groups. So I also just keep it to some highlights. I think one of the solutions we discussed for the second question mainly is the whole branding of food production, and that I think similar to what Lasse mentioned, what Thilini had said about how cool it can really be to be in agriculture. I think this whole social recognition, this whole standing, this whole branding is not there, and if it can be improved, there's more of an incentive for especially young people to go into agriculture. And if they receive skills and entrepreneurship support, training support, it can help them set up their own agribusinesses or to really be part of active part of a transition. And connecting to that, I think what we discussed also is the importance of participation of all stakeholders in different processes, especially also in the policy and planning processes on all levels. And to set up open forums that allow youth groups, that allow farmer associations, that allow all these actors along the supply and value chain to have a voice in the process and make themselves heard and be integrated into these policies and have ownership of them. And I think one last point maybe that we discussed is the importance of plant-based food, organic food, alternative food to be affordable and accessible. And I think that is maybe a big thing in the energy transition that is also there. The renewable energy now becoming more much cheaper and more affordable, that really accelerates the transition. So to have this affordability and accessibility would also be an important part of solutions when it comes to food system transition. And if anyone from the group wants to add anything, please do.
Thanks very much, Dennis, and thank you to everyone who presented and to those who contributed in the groups. Just to let everyone know that the recording of this session will be made available on YouTube. We have your email addresses, so we'll be happy to actually send you a mail with the link as well. And I would also like to thank the speakers and the facilitators for taking the time to be here. It's been 2 hours of your time, but it's also been a very useful and productive time for all of us. We all learned a lot. So thank you for being so kind and sharing your knowledge with us. And before we go, I would like to invite you all to our next event on Monday. So this is for anyone who is interested in climate-related human mobility or anyone who wants to learn more about it. It's a discussion we are conducting with the Embassy of France in Sri Lanka. For those who have already said yes to being alerted about our events, we will be sending you a mail on this as well. But if you haven't done so, please drop your email address on the chat. We'll be happy to send you more details. And with that, we are 1 minute past time. I would like to close this session and thank everyone who joined us here on Zoom as well as on Facebook. I hope you found this as useful and beneficial as I did. And until next time, a good evening from Colombo. Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all and bye.
Thank you.